I know my eyebrows keep popping off. So
is that a cosplay?
It is a cosplay.
It's a retired Oompa Loompa. Hello and welcome to Talking About Who. This is season 22, part 2 of 3. I'm right. I'm Paul or P-Bal, and joining me today are...
Hello, it's James.
And hello, it's Jason.
And this is the return of the cosplay.
It is.
With James.
Yeah.
Are you Shokai or are you Troughton?
I'm Troughton when he goes through the transformation.
When he goes through the change.
Yeah, it goes through the change. Thankfully, a patch sorts it all out. It's all right.
Well, right. At least it's not one of your famous wigs there.
I was sort of hoping for a Shasini wig. I'm not going to lie. I thought Shasini wig and something foily. But anyway,
I thought he was going to come full Rani on us. To be honest with you, as the old washerwoman down the bathhouse.
You know, that was my second choice. I have to say.
It's all right. Jason picked up the slack there, didn't he? Right. Talking of slack, we're going to start. This is our third story of the season, and this is Doctor Who and the Mark of the Rani. Although we are much thankful that they didn't call it Enter the Rani, because that's a terrible title, isn't it?
Oh, that's awful.
There was another. What was the other title? There was the Enter the Rani and something else.
Too clever by far.
By far, that's it. Yeah.
Two. Oh, that's like having 2 hardback copies of the novelization.
Oh, he's got his hardback.
Oh, out. You and your hardbacks, honestly. Yeah, any excuse to whip them out, isn't it? Eh?
It's true. Well, one is quite, this is, people are worried about it. So one is nice and it's signed by Colin, we can see there. One is less nice and has been withdrawn from sale by the library.
And worth considerably less as a result.
But the prose inside is still as magical. It's from Northumberland, if anyone once read that book.
I'd laugh if one of our viewers actually has read that book. That would just, I find that quite amusing.
So who's going to introduce us to Doctor Who and the Enter of the Rani?
I'll start us off then. So 19th century England and its double trouble for the Doctor. This is actually a really nice story. And what a great beginning to it. The direction of this, I think, is great. And you've got that sort of huge, long sort of opening vignette of scenes where they present where they're going to be for this story. And, the location filming, I think, is just beautifully done. A couple of firsts in this story. But, more so for the introduction of a new foe for the Doctor in the guise of the Rani, who I'm sure we'll talk about quite a lot as we go through this. And of course, don't forget, we've got the Master back as well in this one. So lots for everyone, I think, in this story.
Yeah, I think JNT felt that the Master had become too pantomime-y. So he's sort of introduced, the character of the Rani was introduced to try and balance that out. And I agree with you. I like this story. I think it's great to have the 3 of them together. They work. There's some nice sort of comedy moments between them. The Rani is very different. I think we talked about this last time we talked about the other Rani story. The Rani is different to the Master in the fact that she's not necessarily pure evil. She's just she's got things that she wants to achieve. She's amoral rather than evil, whereas he's like trying to get, take over the universe. She's just got her schemes, her plans, her experiments, and she's very reluctant to sort of get involved in the feud between the Master and the Doctor, and she sort of says, leave me out of it. And it's quite interesting. She's been apparently going to Earth and doing this for quite some time, and the Doctor's never noticed until this time when the Master sort of crops up and spoils her plan. So she's a formidable character, and nice to see her thrown into the mix with the other 2.
To be fair, the aliens in the war games were also popping into the conflicts throughout history, and there's quite a few Doctor Who villains are just popping in and out, aren't they? It's like you let those slip for long enough, didn't you? It's quite subtle because it doesn't come out as a plot point, does it? Till quite later on when she sort of says, "Oh, you're littered with all these wars and come back for yonks." You then wonder if she's such a brilliant scientist, why she hasn't managed to synthesize a better brain fluid or worked out how to get somewhere you could get greater quantities from people with bigger brains in the universe or something.
I think whilst we have the both of them in this story, I think we could quite easily have done without the Master and actually just made this a Rani focused story as being almost the villain of the story, if you like. The Master just feels really tacked on for me in this one, and you're right, he's playing it so pantomime at this stage. He's actually almost out camping the Rani, which is saying something. It's got to be said.
I like the fact that Anthony has got the title of the story twice. So he goes, "The Mark of the Rani." He does that twice, and it's like, oh, come on. The first time it was a little bit cringy. The second time it's like, dude, we know you want to be in a trailer somewhere. It's true. It is interesting because he does feel like he's slightly crashing the party. To the point where the Rani knees him in the knackers at the end. She's like, just get out of it. And it's a shame really, because it probably would have been a nicer dynamic if she'd have just had her own, as per the greatest Doctor Who story ever, Dimensions in Time. If she'd have just had her own companion, it would have probably, she could have had, it'd been the parody, I suppose, of Doctor Who and Peri, and had, her assistant. Whereas the Master, it feels a bit like he's the third at dinner that you don't need.
He kind of gets the plot moving, but then it just sort of goes to type, doesn't it? He's just like trying to kill the Doctor in whatever way he can. Whereas, with the Rani, she's like, doesn't want to get sort of sidetracked by any of that. But I like her. I like the fact she's got the mines that turn people into trees. She's got the maggots that sort of take over. Instead of hypnosis, they take over people. She's got all these sort of little tricks and things that she comes with. And you're right, she kind of doesn't really need the Master to overshadow her, because you could imagine she could be quite ruthless on her own if she needed to be, rather than him just cackling. I mean, at one point he's dressed as a scarecrow, isn't he? And he sort of cackles and runs.
But that is one of the single-handedly most bizarre things in Doctor Who, because the Rani is dressing as a crone because she's pretending to run a bathhouse, and if she stood there in her 80s glory, people would be like, "Dress is kind of funny, don't she?" See, I'm almost paraphrasing it there. No. Whereas the Master is just stood in a field dressed like a scarecrow for no bloody reason. Because when the Doctor arrives, he knows he's arrived. So how long was he stood there in that field, just hoping the TARDIS landed nearby?
He used his TARDIS to force the Doctor off course to Earth. So he knew he was coming, but it is really weird. It's like, how long has he been there for like 5 years waiting for the TARDIS to miraculously turn up?
I mean, how much crow shit did he get covered in just waiting for the Doctor to arrive? I mean, it's embarrassing, really.
But there were no birds. There was a particular plot point there that was not followed up on. Where were the birds?
They'd all shat on the Master and moved on.
They'd all been shrunk by his tissue compression eliminator.
Which again, now I adore Sarah Hellings' direction and all, and like Jason said, the intro is lovely and it really sets us up as the period setting everything. Love Sarah Hellings' direction. There are a lot of very bizarrely phallic shots of the Master's gun opening and closing, and it lingers on all that, and it's kind of like, I don't know whether this is trying to sell them or sell something else, but it's kind of like,
was this a merchandise position they were trying? Was JNT trying to make this a something you could buy, a bit like the Sonics?
It's a very slow open. the gun.
Yes.
But it's overused as well in this story, and it appears to It appears to be able to shoot through things and get people and animals. But interestingly, there isn't a tiny little person or a tiny little animal left after the compression has happened to the tissue.
Thought there'd been a little Sylvanian family's dog, wouldn't you? Just stuck somewhere on set. Yeah, it's interesting because on the subject direction, I like the direction of this. I like the styling. The other thing that slightly doesn't work from directing point of view, and I suppose writing as well, I think the cliffhanger to part one is a bit, it's a bit somehow. It feels contrived, and it sort of feels a bit that awkward thing of him tumbling down the track. You get this whole thing where he's on this. He's somehow they've managed to get this cart out of the Rani's bathhouse, and then he's trundling down the hill, and you think, great, this is the cliffhanger. Then all of a sudden he gets sort of rescued, but that's not enough. They take him off the trolley and stick him on another trolley and push him off down the rails towards the mine. And it lacks any credibility, honestly, I think, the cliffhanger for me.
I think you get to see Colin do all his own stunts. I mean, lying down on a trolley. But it is a bit odd. I mean, you're right, the sort of Luddites, if you like, come along, pick him up, put him on another trolley and send him on his way again. But, they had not that long since dumped the TARDIS down the mine shaft. So I guess they were just doing this sort of same thing to him, trying to dump him down there. But it's a very odd way to end the first episode.
I mean, the other thing, which I'm not a shallow person here, but Peri's grotesque yellow dress. Do you know what? It's really interesting that it's the first time that this season we saw. I mean, she gets her trousers, doesn't she? I guess in the time. It's like there's the opportunity to have a lovely period costume, and there's this day glow yellow thing that they cram her into, and I just think, oh, it's a bit of a shame that she could have had a pretty Victorian frock, and it looks awful. I'm not saying she looks awful. I just think the yellowing is not. It wouldn't have been the colour I went for.
I mean, she kind of, her character in this story, apart from some of the botanical stuff that she does later on when she's trying to find the herb that will help him sleep, her role is literally just going after the doctor saying, why are we doing this? What are we doing? Could you just repeat that? Could you tell me again what we're doing? Oh, I've been captured. Could you tell me what we're doing? I don't know. There's something in this story. I feel Peri unfortunately takes a bit of a back seat because you've got the Rani and the Master. Her role just seems to be filling in. I don't know whether that came across to you, but it just felt she didn't really get much in this story.
No, there's much more of a focus here towards, as you say, the principal villains, I think, and the Doctor. And I think it's quite a lot. It's quite a big cast as well. So you've got quite a lot going on. There's a couple of different plot strands going on. And I think I agree with you, James. I think she's a little bit lost in the narrative on this one. Also, I mean, I don't think Doctor Who's there to be processed too hard plot-wise. The sleeping draft at the end, when the Peri's like, I've made a sleeping draft, it's like, you don't need to, I've given them the file. The file that's about that big, he's given them that, but has he told them how to put that fluid back into the people and to stop them being crazy, violent Luddites? I was kind of like, how do they do it? Do they have to just put a little pipette full in, or I mean, one of them will come along and just gulp it down.
I was going to say,
and nobody else will get any of it.
They'll just be asleep forever because.
Yeah, it does. That part of it feels like it doesn't quite tally up. I mean, Doctor and Peri aren't as bickery as they have been in other stories. I think there's a bit in the sort of early door, but I think as it goes, they seem to be getting along. He seems to be worried about her safety and things like that. And it seems quite nice. There's not the sort of arguing that we've had in previous. And I also don't think this one's quite as, I mean, Yes, we have quite theatrical fights, I think, with the Luddites and you know, it's all a bit, you know, yeah, daft old beggar, and they kick, you know, all that. It's like, but I don't think it's. I mean, it's not as violent as what we had before, and it's certainly not as violent as what we've got coming up.
The accents are quite jarring, though, aren't they? Wouldn't you say?
That's how they spoke back then.
That's the accent of the what, isn't it? They're meant to be up north, aren't they?
Do you think all of the actors carried off the accents perfectly well?
What, my favourite is like, talks kind of funny, don't he? Hold hard. That's my favourite. I use that more than I should do, and it's not an easy thing to crowhorn into anything sort of conversation. Talks kind of funny.
No,
it's great. I'd like to think, you know, where's Cheryl Cole to be in TV's Doctor Who? She could have been in Mark of the Rani. She could be the Rani.
She
could be the modern, the new incarnation of the Rani, which we might get. You never know.
You'll have to ask Russ, Jason. Ask Russ what he's got planned.
I'll drop it into conversation next time.
Have a coffee down the bay.
Pip and Jane's script is quite good on a number of levels, I think, in this story. You're right. Don't look at some of the little bits of plot that don't quite work. But I think it's a brave thing to set a story in that sort of era with the Luddites and the sort of the Industrial Revolution stuff, and to have come up with the plot line around bringing all of those people who were sort of quite key to the Industrial Revolution coming together. I think, you know, introducing a new character like the Rani, and, you know, I think this story is based in some fact of science, I think, and I think it's a good script from them overall.
Yeah, I think Pip and Jane get a lot of stick for not creating something that's necessarily artistically incredible, but they know how to tell a story, they know how to tell an adventure, and they know how to keep pace. And I think these do feel, again, we talked about the 45-minute things, they do feel like 2 45-minute episodes, and I think they keep the pace going. I didn't get to the end of this one and think, how long is it going to go? But then again, on the other hand, I think this one benefits straight after Vengeance on Varos just being in the studio to the beautiful location stuff, and there is something that lifts it when you feel that it's out in a real world and it looks good, and the BBC just do that thing. They do the historical, don't they? They do the look of it so well. So you're onto a winner straight away with that, I think.
It does look beautiful. The outside shots, and sort of even, I know we just talked about the cliffhanger, but even sort of like the rail track and the mine and everything. And it's an interesting setting for it, because you wouldn't necessarily think that time, the time of the Luddites, would be really lend itself to science fiction. But the way they've written it and the way they've included it, there was a lot of natural anger. So it was a really good place for the Rani to be doing her experiments, because you wouldn't notice, you wouldn't necessarily spot another angry person trying to sabotage machinery, because that was already going on. So it is a clever bit of writing in that respect.
And I also think that the incidental music that's used in conjunction with the direction on this also works extremely well. Jonathan Gibbs, I think, was the guy behind the music on this one.
He took over from John Lewis because he passed away. He originally was doing it, and he passed away, sadly. So yeah, he took over doing the music.
What do we think of the tree?
Oh God!
So before
he turned Gary into a tree.
I was going to say
Luke turns into a very well pronged tree.
I mean, he was very nice to look at before he was turned into a tree, but then it's a bit odd, isn't it? When he saves, the tree saves Peri from one of the mines. I just think. No.
The weird thing is, I think Gary's performance gets more natural when he's taken over by the maggot. I don't know if it's the right way around. He seems to be a bit more normal when he's under the master's control. The master using the beautiful line, I want you to taste this very sweet meat.
Yes, that was an interesting line for the master to be using.
Gonna pop this maggot in your mouth.
Back to Jason's chat-up lines now, aren't we?
Rude, I tell you, rude.
Terence Alexander, again, is quite interesting, I suppose, because the guest cast in terms of guest villains are sort of bigger. You kind of forget he's a big star doing this, and he's giving he's on the right levels of this, I think.
He's proper BBC costume drama, isn't he? He's just basically walked off the set of another drama and walked straight into this and gone, oh yeah, I can do this quite easily.
Yeah, he definitely, and he's a heavyweight for this kind of thing. And, you know, the performance, he doesn't really need to put that much into it because I think he's got a presence anyway. You're right, he could have just stepped out of something like the Aneden line and straight into this, you know, but he is a proper BBC character actor of good standing, I think. And I think that's true of a lot of this season. And we'll talk about each of them as we get to each of the stories. But, you know, they all the way through 22, they are getting some really, really good names coming into to come alongside the regular cast here. And you spoiled for choice every story for, you know, people to call out for great performances.
We've not quite got to the era of stunt casting extraordinaire, have we?
Kate O'Mara's to some extent a big kind of.
She was a big name to bring in, but when you sort of start on the McCoy ones, you've got, you know, Ken Dodd and that kind of thing.
I suppose you've got Joan Sims next year. I think it's a fine line on what you call. I'm not just disagreeing with you to be contrary. I think it's a fine line, I suppose, on what people call stunt or don't. I suppose Jacqueline Pearce and Paul Darrow, are they stunt casting because it's a Blake Seven kind of?
I don't know. It's hard to know on that one. I mean, particularly with Kate O'Mara, you know, it by all accounts, you know, he asked her to be in Doctor Who straight off the back of her having been in Dynasty, and you know, she was a big name at the time, but somehow she doesn't come into it and strike me quite as much of a stunt casting as somebody like Nicholas Parsons, for example.
I guess because Kate's she was known for a lot of stuff before. I mean, Main Chance, Brothers, and I suppose she'd done enough series and films, all the Hammer stuff and things like that. So she's an actress without. Nick Parsons obviously had acted, but he wasn't known as an actor. He was Johnny Sailor of the Century and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, that's what people would have got him for.
She'd worked with Colin before, hadn't she? She'd done something.
The Brothers, yeah. He's the bad guy. She's the goodie in the Brothers. So it's the sort of inverse of it. So they were great friends before, which I think helps. I think you can tell on the chemistry front.
Yeah, you can.
All the bits about the regeneration, which is like, I don't think your regeneration is terribly flattering or something like that. There's a joke about that, isn't there?
But I think again, you know, the fact they've worked together, and you're right, the chemistry's there. But I think the chemistry's there between Colin and Nicola, and it builds really well through this season. They seem very natural around each other. It doesn't seem they're bouncing off each other very, very well. I mean, the Doctor's character is to be abrasive towards her anyway, but you just see that sort of bond working as you come through the season, do you think?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think they work well together. It is just a shame, and it does feel the bits where you get where they have to have some sort of protracted conflict. Even, I mean, it's hard to do individual stories and that sort of narrative, because you kind of think, well, there's that bit in Revelation where he's foul, and you think, well, it's just so out of what seems to be bobbing along. There's a moment where it's just like, you know, and you think, oh, it lacks the consistency to that extent. I think the way they're playing it is fine, and the way to an extent it's generally written is fine, but there are just the odd moments peppered in there where you just think, it doesn't need to be there, because it's not. I think the thought is that it's adding character and a bit of tension, but it just feels a bit pithy and spiteful.
Yeah, it comes across actually at times, and you see it in other stories, not so much in this one, but it comes across almost like a little bit of a bullying thing. He's trying to, keep her down, shout loud, and you put somebody down. I don't know, it makes me feel a little uncomfortable.
like we just did then with the pause.
Yeah, we love these pauses though. We always Rani's set for the TARDIS. What do you think of that?
I was going to say that the TARDIS is. I love the Rani's TARDIS. I think it's so stylish. I think. Don't get me wrong. There are some TARDIS sets that that I love, but when you see the Rani's TARDIS, there's something about it. I like the rings, the console. It just looks very sleek.
Had a lot of problems with the rings, though, didn't they? The rings made too much noise, I think.
Yeah, very noisy. You can hear it. When there's no dialogue, they can get rid of it. But when there's dialogue over the top of it, they're struggling, and you can hear that sort of rotor going in the background. It's quite distracting.
It's a good effect, though. It looks really, nice. The bit with the dinosaur, I think. Doctor Who has a problem with dinosaurs. Really does. Can't really quite get it right. But that's sort of by the by. But the TARDIS itself is really nice. I do like it.
I mean, that is a proper bit of sci-fi business. That she keeps dinosaur embryos in open jars. Yeah. B, that Times Village just makes them grow. It's just like you created a cliffhanger, which they must both get out of. I mean, how we don't know. With one bound, they were free, but
they've not played any part in the story either. So you're in the TARDIS, and okay, it's giving you that bit to the end through the time speeding away, but there's no explanation as to why she's even got these things in her TARDIS. It just doesn't seem to make any sense. Just
for fun. But again, that's her. There's a great conversation when she's talking to the Doctor. About because he's like, you can't experiment on these people, and she's like, well, they're basically like sheep, everyone on this planet eats meat, so what right have you got to lecture me about what I'm doing? And I think she would keep a dinosaur on the TARDIS, but just for fun, because she doesn't see anything particularly wrong with that.
I think they were originally going to have crotons growing out of those at the end. at the end, it was going to be crotons developing out the tank. I think that was the original idea there.
Oh, I'd have had quarks myself.
They didn't grow out of tanks. The crotons did. Did you not watch the story?
I was just getting a cheap quark reference in for James.
There's been lots of quark talk recently.
I sidestepped the quarks because then you didn't make sense, you mad old Mary.
Oh, okay. I spoiled a good joke.
Yes. Well, I think
the other thing.
She must have them there as a part of something, because she's not into the fun thing, is she? Yeah. The great line is when she says about the master. What's the master up to? He get dizzy walking in a straight line, something overly complicated and unnecessary. About right for the character.
Also, the Doctor got into her TARDIS far too easily for my liking.
Using his own key.
The Cybermen got into the TARDIS with amazing ease the week before. So maybe they've got like some kind of open door TARDIS situation going on.
The other thing is, which comes up again in another story, is the Stattenheim remote control, which he's very jealous of, which then, having never been heard of, comes up in the next story.
Which is quite... On a completely unrelated yet slightly Pip and Jane note here, I was listening to the start of Doctor Who and the Time of the Rani, read by Bonnie Langford, the Target thing, and there's a reference the Doctor has forgotten to operate HADS, which is from the Crotons. He's forgotten to operate HADS, and that's how the Rani shoots the TARDIS down. It's like, crikey, who told them that? It's in the book. It's canon.
Good
Brilliant.
enough for us then.
But I think, is it not just after this that the news went live about the cancellation? I think just after this story.
It was, and I think, had they completed filming the rest of the series, or was there still more to film when the cancellation came down on top of them?
Yeah, it was that they were on a break. I mean, if I'm wrong on that, I think it had done because the edit was on. That's how they edited Revelation, so it was finished.
Yeah, they cut the last word off, and they'd already broken between the series, and then they just extended that break, didn't they, to 18 months?
I mean, it must have made, obviously, with that announcement and all of that behind the scenes shenanigans going on, it must have made it a little bit more challenging for filming some of these, I think.
No, they weren't filming concurrently with the.
Oh yeah, they're out of order in this season, aren't they? Of course they are. Yes.
But we're sort of denied the cancellation, which is a whole topic in itself. We are denied the next Rani story because that would have been great. Having said that, Rani and the Autons and the Master, I don't know whether we'd have had the same situation that we have with this. That we don't need both; just have the one. So. Have we got any exciting facts on the Mark of the Rani?
We have covered all the facts that I had on my pad.
Wow, that's a first for us.
Oh, Jason's got a poppity ping.
I did have a ping go off there. I apologise for that.
Jason's got a new fact just in.
Jason, it's 2 episodes of 45 minutes approx. Right, so let's have some scores for Doctor Who and the Mark of the Rani, Doctor Who and the Enter the Rani, Doctor Who and the Too Clever by Far.
Go on, I'll go. It really is just a bit of camp old fun, really, isn't it? It's yes, you could, pick out the things that aren't necessarily brilliant about it, but there is something about the 3 Time Lords and their interactions together. Does the Master need to be there? Probably not, but he gets he sort of is the instigator of the sort of Doctor finding out about the Rani. I think the Rani versus the Doctor is a really interesting combination because he doesn't see her necessarily as evil either. So whereas he's always, I'm just going to stop the Master, there is an element of him that's curious as to what she's doing and how she's doing it. And it goes at a nice enough pace. So I did score this an 8.
What's a big 8?
It was a big 8. Yeah, yes. It's an episode I can watch. And put it on, watch it, enjoy it. It's again, it's one of those ones where you don't poke too many holes in it, but let's leave the tree out.
Yeah, it's best not to mention the tree or the other trees that suddenly appear later on in the story as well, because they're equally just as bad as the first one. Okay, so overall for me, a nice little story. It's a great script, I think, from Pip and Jane, and I think the way that they based it, with the sort of Luddite background, popping a little bit into historical works well for me. I absolutely adore the location work that was done on this, and as quite a large proportion of the story seemed to be shot on location, they certainly had their money's worth from the use of the location that they were on. Colin and Nicola, I think, are on great form. The introduction of the Rani is actually really, really welcome. The inclusion of the Master for me, though, not so much. So all things being equal, this is a nice solid 7 for Mark of the Rani.
Did they get the historical bits right, Jason?
I beg pardon? How would I know that?
I didn't throw any machinery. Oh, imagine getting his nails dirty down the pit. He'd never recover. He'd never recover.
Oh, no, it's not for me, I don't think. I don't think it's for me.
He'd be the old crone in the bathhouse trying to get them to get the clothes off.
Don't. That's scandalous, as well you know it is.
Well, do you know what? This is getting a little bit season 22 spooky, because my score for 3 Time Lords, 1 Plot. How about that for a subtitle for it? 3 times. Okay. If you're grown up, you'll get the reference. It's fine. So Jason's given it a 7. James has given it an 8. I've given it a 7.5.
Oh,
we're not normally this aligned. This is good stuff.
This is chilling, which actually means we have a new leading story.
oh,
22.5. That means the Mark of the Rani is now our leader. I could have given people the scores from last week, which I didn't, which Attack of the Cybermen is on 21 and Vengeance on Varos is on 12. So that's our new current leader, but there are still 3 more stories to go. And the next one is Doctor Who and the Two Doctors. Which,
the hardback.
Another hardback. With a foreword by John Nathan Turner for you, if you please. So, who's got Witten? The funny thing is, and this is a dear viewer, you will all know this, the covers at this point, because of copyright problems with Doctor Who's agent, there are no covers which feature characters. They're all sort of monsters and stuff. That's a Sontaran and 2 Tardai.
Oh.
Can't put characters from.
A silver bit of blocking at the top there as well.
It's gold. It's lethal to Cyberman. It's gold.
Oh. Well, the line that I wrote was the 2nd and 6th Doctor get in a fix with some Sontarans, but not the one you're thinking of. And they're off to sunny Seville.
That's more like it, James. You can't get away with the other one anymore.
I don't know what you mean. So we have a multi-Doctor story. And the weird thing is, it's not that long ago since we had the last multi-Doctor story, and it's not any sort of anniversary special. But that being said, it is nice to have Patrick Troughton back playing the 2nd Doctor, and obviously you've got Fraser Hines playing Jamie into the mix as the 2nd Doctor finds himself captured to try and unlock the secret of time travel, which then puts the 6th Doctor at risk, and they go and try and rescue him.
It's a great premise for the story, actually, because the Doctor's got to save himself to save himself, which is kind of like an interesting premise. For me, it's got quite a lot going for it, this story. It's an old 6-parter in old school parlance, 3 parts, obviously, in the way they were presenting this season. But for me, it's Viva, we're off to sunny Spain. I'm not quite sure why Spain, but I'm sure we'll discuss the pros and the cons and the merits of that as we go through the discussion on this story. Good to see the Sontarans back.
I think that because we're going to go on this point, the Seville thing, I think Robert Holmes wanted it to be Chicago or something, because he wanted
New Orleans. They wanted.
Okay. They decided that was too expensive for a jaunt, but a package holiday to Spain was within the BBC budget.
And they did all, I think, get a bit of a holiday off the back of it as well, because there are quite a few photos flying around them, relaxing around the pool and enjoying themselves in between filming. But it's a good story, and it's a lovely opening to this story, actually, because see, we've got Pat Troughton back and Jamie, and the first couple of seconds of the first scene in the TARDIS, nicely presented in black and white, and even down to the little touch of bringing out the pre-5 Doctors console and replacing it with replacing the more modern version, so that it was a little bit more authentic. Although I've got to be honest, for me, and it sticks out like a sore thumb every time I watch this story, this is so jarring in canon of where this is actually positioned, because they so say they've just dropped Victoria off for she's off for a little bit, and but they're on a mission for the Time Lords. It screws up 6B theories. It screws up everything, I think.
Victoria's studying graphology. That's the biggest mystery about all this. When they said she was off on a crochet course, I could have got with that. But graphology, where's that from?
I mean,
Yeah,
if it had been Jamie and Zoe, you could have justified it that they were on some sort of missions just before, there was a little bit of the war games we didn't see, and then you could fit it into the narrative there. But this sticks out for me a little bit like a sore thumb.
I mean, they could have got around and said, "Oh, Victoria's got a dicky tummy. We'll leave her for a bit and we'll get back." I mean, that would have been more believable.
Yeah, it is a bit odd. And like you say, if they hadn't have said about Victoria, it would have fitted into the 6B theory, wouldn't it?
It would have done. And this is why I think it's a bit, it's a jar. I mean, obviously, it's a bit of a continuity thing. We're picking on it. Probably it's only a small plot it's only a small part of the script, I suppose. But it doesn't fit narrative as far as we're concerned from a canon perspective.
So where are we at on the casual cannibalism that's quite prevalent in this story?
I mean, you were just saying about violence in the last story being less, but now you've got this story where the doctor gets stabbed in the leg. He's tenderizing Jamie to eat him. Shokai eats a rat he picks off the floor. There are some really unpleasant bits, when Shokai kills the restaurant guy, he just thought, for having a go at him. There is a very casual level of violence in this, and very graphic in some cases as well.
Indeed. I mean, if you think about the audience, Saturday late afternoon tea time, and what you've got, it's bloodthirsty. Actually, you could describe this story as multiple stabbings, not just the one, multiple stabbings. The cannibalism, as you've suggested, P-Bal. But I found the unnecessary killing of Oscar in the restaurant in part 3 just a little bit too strong and a bit unnecessary, actually, in the script.
I mean, Anita's the only character that survives. Out of the non-TARDIS regulars, everybody else either is killed, gets killed by someone else, or it dies in the time machine or whatever else. It's quite ruthless in that respect. I mean, when the Doctor kills Shokai as well.
The Doctor killing Shokai, I think, is the single most misjudged part of this, I think, probably the entire season. I can sort of just say that some of the violence is distasteful or something like that, but the point is he quite viciously he doesn't kill, he smothers him, and you see Shokai dying and fighting back, and then I think worse than that, when he drops to the floor dead, he goes, "You're just desserts." And it's like, oh my God, you brutally murdered someone, and now you're making a joke about it. It's like,
I mean, we had the acid bath where you could argue that actually he didn't throw the 2 men in, or where he walked off and said, "I won't join you fellas." But this, he actually did kill him and then quip about it.
It's not I've had to do this, and I'm sorry, I've had to kill. This is a survival situation. He's and then when he gets back to the hacienda, he's like, oh, he's otherwise engaged or something like that. It's like, oh, it's another kind of like, I don't know. It tastes nasty. That does. I mean, the thing at the restaurant, I think, is horrible. Oscar dying, and again, it's that thing that you don't get now, where they dye their eyes open, so you have that kind of corpse with blood and eyes open. That's quite grim. The funny thing, because I've got a horrible sense of humor, is that because the extras in the restaurant aren't paid to do anything other than eat at tables, nobody does anything. He's been stabbed to death. There's been a kerfuffle and people have been thrown out. Anita's wailing because he's dead. Everyone else is just still doing dinner acting without even doing
there was one extra that was more horrified by the fact that they were still eating their food. He was having a wave of his finger around, and then the stabbing happens, and you're quite right, the extras do nothing. It's not just you. I find that totally jarring in itself. I mean, it's a wonderful piece of tragic comedy to a degree, the way that he plays the death part, but there's nothing else going on in that restaurant. It just feels really bizarre.
It would sort of make more sense if Shokai had pulled out a gun and told everyone to get out or something, and then shot him or something. It would have probably landed slightly more. But yeah, it does seem like I suppose they're trying to mirror the fact that Oscar, kills the butterflies, and people's takes on. That's probably what that is, or it's just a bit of nastiness.
I mean, you do feel a little bit sorry. I mean, he is a bit of a buffoon, really, the character. But he doesn't really do anything that warrants being stabbed.
Well, no, both him and Anita, actually, the character of Anita, bring a little bit of lightheartedness. They bring a bit of a relief from some of the heaviness of this story at times, particularly in the early stages. And you think that they're not in it anymore, and then obviously they come back in the restaurant scene, so they're set up deliberately to be there. But yeah, I don't know. It just feels wrong on a number of levels, I think. And of course, it drew quite a lot of criticism at the time, and it was cited primarily as one of the reasons why potentially the show had got cancelled, even though I think that had already happened at this point. But it drew a lot of criticism back in the day, I think.
Yeah, there was a lot of complaints about it. It was described as the most violent episode or violent story.
I mean, even down to the Sontarans as well. The Sontarans when they're melted with the bubbling of the water, and then his legs blown off. That doesn't quite make a lot of sense because he's told his underling to set the destruct on the ship because they're going to go off in the time machine. And then when he's dragging himself away, he goes back to the ship that he knows is about to explode because he's ordered it. So I don't know if I've missed something in there. Put it down there. I'm happy to say that I've missed something, but he's going back to the ship. He's ordered his underling to blow up, so he's surprised when he gets blown up. Unless he's trying to stop the self-destruct to go. I don't know. There is I'm gonna, here's his leg. He's been blown up, and it's kind of like.
That's some crime scene the police are going to come across there when they arrive at the house.
Well, yeah, I mean, the snap neck of the Doña Urana and everything else. It's kind of like, I mean, to go back to Anita, there's a lovely light touch, I think, from Carmen and Colin. And there's that moment where she says goodbye and she gives him a kiss. And then Jamie doesn't get one and he's a bit put out. And then at the end, he makes sure he gets a kiss from Peri. And there's a bit of business that's quite funny. It's quite light. But I find it quite an uncomfortable watch, the two Doctors. I find it. I think it's because it doesn't. It alludes to being quite light-hearted, but it's not. And I don't know whether that's probably why I find it. Because I'm going to be I don't want to flip ahead in the timelines here, but I'm going to be very hypocritical because there is a story coming up that is probably more violent that I like. But I don't know whether it's just that the tone isn't set correct. The tone is set a little bit more camp with this, and then the gore.
I mean, if you look at so Jacqueline Pearce is brilliant, and I'm sure we'll talk about her in a moment. She's every scene she's in. For me, I just find her really captivating. There is a lot of campness about it. But then you have this really jarring violence as well. And I think it doesn't sit together very well. There is violence in other stories, but the backdrop to it and the scenario fits the violence. Whereas this feels like we're off to sunny Spain for a bit of a holiday. You've got all the sort of like... incidental music where they're sort of playing the guitar and they're all sat outside in the sunshine, and then they're butchering people, and there is something that doesn't. All these things put together don't necessarily add up to something that is entirely palatable.
They don't. I mean, the violence is quite, like I said, I've already called it bloodthirsty in the review, and I'll stick by that. But I think there are some lovely moments in this story as well. And I think that both can sit side by side. I come out of it feeling, yes, okay, some of the violence is a little senseless, but I'm not overpowered by it to the extent where it spoilt the entire narrative of the story for me. So this isn't a favorite. It's a good, solid story. It's not one of my top 10, but it's a story I enjoy watching every time I watch it because there's a certain amount of nostalgia in there. There's enough nostalgia and you know, the interplay between the two doctors and, you know, having Jamie there and Peri working together and, you know, the Sontarans, and you've got Jacqueline Pearce. You've got enough going on around it, I think, to soften the blow of some of what is that, you know, a violent element in the story.
I think the two TARDIS crews do really well together. I think they bond quite quickly. I think Jamie works really well with Colin, with the Sixth Doctor. I think that part works okay. I just think that there are some other elements to this story, and I forgot that it was 3 parts rather than 2, and I really felt the 3 parts. Whereas, you know, the last story we were just talking about zoomed along at quite a pace. You know, this story took a few sort of diversions to flesh out some of the characters, but it didn't feel like it needed some of that. It could have been a little bit shorter to me.
I think one of the things I'd say, again, I'm not hating here, but I think Peter Moffat was a safe pair of hands rather than an exciting pair of hands. And I think there are a lot of points in this where you've got big moments or exciting moments, and they are lost through it just being in focus and well shot. You know what I mean? It's kind of like the reveal of the Sontarans is nothing. They basically walk on as if they just got off a bus or something. There's no, you know, and I think that's a bit of a shame, because I suppose down to the fact that it's a bigger shoot because it's a 6-parter, 3-parter, which are you looking at, and you've got the international filming. I guess maybe as a production you think, let's get someone who we know can contend with this. He'd obviously done the 5 Doctors, so there wasn't a worry about him dealing with two lead actors, or, you know, I get the logic of it. I slightly think he doesn't do anything terribly exciting with his direction. I mean, he doesn't do a bad job, but it's just not an exciting job.
No, and they had filming problems while they were out in Spain because they had a heat wave, the makeup was melting, there was a problem with the wigs as well, and the Sontarans were getting sort of heat exhaustion in the costumes. So there were issues, but I don't know. I think you're right. I think it is safe, but at the same time, it's still really jarringly violent.
I mean, they wouldn't have had problems with the wigs if they'd filmed it in Cardiff. They could have gone to taste the food on Wine Street, couldn't they? And there'd been no heat problems with anyone having slippy glue, would there?
You would think, though, with them knowing that they're going to take the story off to a foreign location, that they possibly could have chosen a different villain than the Sontaran, bearing in mind they are probably the worst costumes to have in the heat in that way.
They were quite skinny Sontarans as well. They were sort of very sort of the costumes were quite snug.
They're tall and skinny, aren't they? The Sontarans. Yeah. Sort of, as the sort of things rolled on, you know, returning appearances, they've got less squat and muscular and more sort of tall and slender.
Like a Mediterranean version of the Sontarans
with the most ill-fitting plastic neck ring that it's not supposed to be attached to the body, and it's like that far away. It's ridiculous.
I have to say though, Pat Troughton in this is it's so nice to have him back. He gets to not only sort of play the Doctor, but he gets to play, you know, a different version of him when he's merged with the genes. He just seems like he's having a great time. He just fit, and some of the sort of behind the scenes stuff, whether I know there's going to be some stuff coming up on the new Blu-ray box talking about the behind the scenes. They just were having such a great time. They all seem to get on, really well, and it's just a real delight to see him back. for this, for this last appearance.
Yeah, he's got a proper twinkle in his eye during this story, and the scenes that he gets to play, he gets some good bits up front while he's confronting Dastari. He gets some great scenes actually with John Stratton as Shokai, and I think John Stratton's piece in this is absolutely superb. It's sublime to the point where I think I could pinpoint him as this being one of the guest appearances for me in this season. The portrayal of Shokai is both comic and serious in equal measures, and it just sits perfectly within the story.
Yeah, it's a really good performance, and I think even though it's a horrible character, even though he's eating people, it's again, that's probably another reason why it does jar when TV's Doctor Who slowly slaughters him with yeah, Lawrence Payne, I think, does a beautiful underplay, cosplaying as Sheldon. I think it's quite I think he does do a lovely underplay on this actually, and I think I think because he's underplaying and there's a lot of other overplays, you probably slightly forget sometimes quite how good he is in this, but he is. Yeah. Jacqueline Pearce, if you like what Jacqueline Pearce does and things, then you'll love her in this. That's my review.
Yeah, I mean, she's properly Jacqueline Pearce in this, and she commands the screen when she's on there. But I genuinely think that there are slightly bigger performances in this story that I think, while she plays a great part. For me, I think John Stratton's out there in the lead as one of the key guests in this story.
I like the contrast though, because she is very controlled, whereas obviously Shokai is not, until the very end, and that's when Dastari realizes that his experiment has gone wrong, when she sees the blood on the floor, and she sort of devolves, if you like, back to her sort of natural state. And I like that. I think that sort of character goes quite well for me. But it's yeah, I mean, there are some really strong performances in here.
Interestingly, Elizabeth Spriggs was set up to play Jacini originally. I just wonder how that would have played out up against Shokai. Could have actually been quite a good dynamic between the two of them.
I think physically it would have made a visual a more not realistic, but I think visually that would have probably been a better match. But I suppose she got to come back as a cannibal in Paradise Tower, so they didn't strike her off, did they, on the tick list?
No, I'm glad we did get her eventually in the series. She would have been good in this one though as well, I think. Who else are we on? I think I've already talked about the Oscar and Anita double pairing. I think it works really well, gives you that sort of comic relief up against some of the seriousness of it. Some of it's a little bit twee in the beginning, but it obviously plays out when you get to episode 3.
So, do we have any exciting facts from James?
We have covered most of them. The Stattenheim remote control, though, the second Doctor has one. So
was he given it by a fugitive Doctor that was a pre-Hartnell?
Oh, I don't know.
We're into all sorts of dynamic of it all being wrong.
I mean, having had the 6th Doctor complain that he wanted one in the previous story, now suddenly he's jealous because his former self has got one. I was like, but...
Or is it an alternative timeline? Is it not even his own timeline? Is he not? He might not be from this universe. He might be from the universe that Flux and Tech Turn are taking us into.
Could be.
Don't start that, though. Don't tend us down that path.
He could be a Tech Turn Doctor from an alternative dimension. You just don't know. We'd have to ask Chibnall.
And I'm not sure you get a straight answer, even if you did.
Now there is one thing I was going to talk about. So there is. And people have got different views on it, but there is a moment where Peri mouths something to the Doctor. I don't know if you've heard about this or seen it. It's in one of the sort of conversations when, going back to what you said, Jason, about sometimes he's a bit of a bully and puts her down. And she's seen him mouthing in the background something obscene, but it's whether or not that actually is what people see.
I've not heard of that before.
I have to say, I didn't notice it myself.
I've only heard the anecdote about the water and when he brings around with the cup of water and then he throws a bucket of water on the last time. That story. I never heard of us in the background going.
That's pretty much what people believe she was doing when he makes some quip about her and she goes,
I don't believe that. She's a clean girl. She wouldn't come out with filth.
One for the eagle-eyed viewers.
Mm-hmm. I have to say, for me, one last thing, the design of the Karts Reimer travel machine is probably one of the weaker design elements in this story.
Isn't that what Hartnell was sitting in the Three Doctors?
It's exactly what it was, I think. It's the same thing. It probably is.
Thing. I expected him to open the door and he's there.
Every time they opened the door on it, the whole thing's doing this. And having to hook the door up.
It was propped against the wall so it wouldn't fall over.
It wouldn't last 2 seconds in the time continuum, in my opinion.
So, I think, on Doctor Who and the Androgum Inheritance. Yeah, I thought one of the titles. Do we have scores?
Yes, we have got some scores. Lots good on this story. We've got Pat back, we've got Jamie back, we've got Dr. Six and Peri on good form. We've got the Sontarans. You've got some great cast that are playing alongside it. Yes, the violence is a little bit heavy, but the story's quite watchable, even in an old school 6-part as it would have been, rather than 3 parts as it was presented, because actually it was being presented in the US in their component parts. So it was actually a 6-part story when it was shown out in the States, for example. But I think this has got a fair bit going for it. Odd to have a multi-Doctor story when it's not an anniversary year as well. That's the only other thing that sits a little bit to the side. I can forgive the violence a little bit in it because I'm a big lover of the second Doctor, and I think having 2 Doctors in any story is a great thing. So I'm out there on a limb with the 2 Doctors possibly here, and I'm scoring it an 8.
Ooh. It's gone in with James's 8. So what does our Androgum second Doctor have to say on it?
Well, whilst it's so good to see Patrick back, I can't as easily dismiss the violence in it. And then there are points where I'm watching going, am I really watching an episode of Doctor Who where someone's, characters just picked up a rat from the floor and started eating it and stabbed someone? There are moments in this that don't feel that Doctor Who, and the premise and everything on paper it should be. So for me, it's not as enjoyable as the previous story, and so I gave this story a 7.
7,
which is still not bad.
Boom, boom.
That's not too far off what Jason gave it. Do you know what? I feel like I should like the 2 Doctors, and I don't. And I watched it, and again, it's lovely to see Pat back, and I think fine to see him back. And I think you lose a bit of him where he's sort of knocked out for episodes and whatever. The other violent bit, obviously, when the Sontaran cracks him on across the face, that's a proper smack. That is. I don't know. I mean, again, me and violence, I don't know where I go on it, because yes and no. It depends what mood I'm in, yes, as to whether I approve of it or disapprove of it. I don't think I like the 2 Doctors particularly. I think it's a little too long. I don't think that the plot is too brilliant. The Sontarans, if you took the Sontarans out of this,
You wouldn't
I
miss
don't
it.
think there'd be any difference, would there? They don't add they sort of turn up for the holiday in Spain, get bumped off. They don't do anything. There's a sort of, and I always think when they make allusions to having, you know, big fleets, but they've only sent 2 of them down to sort this out. I mean, if you've got a commander and a major, well, you need some troops, dude. So yes, for me, I think The Five Doctors is more flop than hit, and I scored it 5. 5's an average score. Anything below 5 is below average, and I'm saying 5. I don't hate it. I just don't think it's as good as it could.
It's always going to score slightly higher with me because I'm a big lover of Troughton's Doctor, and I think, you know, it's nice to have him in this as part of the story, and that's where
I'm wearing him. I'm wearing him right now.
You are indeed animated Troughton there.
I've got Troughton on my titties right now, but I still don't think The Two Doctors is all that. James is dressed up as him.
That I want on a t-shirt. I've got Troughton on my titties.
We wouldn't like to say with the amount of families he had, how many ladies would be wearing those t-shirts. So I think the score on The Two Doctors therefore comes in at 20 points.
Oh.
So as a little rundown there, so far, in 4th place, we have Vengeance on Varos on 12. In 3rd place with 20 points, The Two Doctors. 2nd place, Attack of the Cybermen on 21, which means our current leader is the Mark of the Rani on 22.5. But there are still 2 stories to go. It can all change. So if you've enjoyed, like, subscribe, and all that stuff. Thank you very much, guys.
Lovely to be here as always.
Yeah, it's lovely to be here.
And we shall see you again next week for part 3.